afternoon, depending upon where you are. We're going to talk about chaplaincy. That seems to be a hot button profession for mid level profession seekers, and it has come with some controversy. But I think we need to have just a bit of a roundtable discussion on what chaplaincy is, what is its history, what is it, why is it popping up everywhere? What are all these seminaries? What are people learning? And what we think about it in general. So this evening, I have Imam Frederick Zafir al-Din, who is what we'll say a slightly older chaplain, way back when in the day. No, I'm not going to say John Wayne. In the day when there were very few Muslim and especially African American Muslim chaplains in a federal bureau, and also Imam Abdul Malik Merchant, who is a new arrival to that kind of scene. But he's also an imam, and both of these men are imams, and that gives us a chance to talk about the chaplain and the imam. Oh, that sounds like the title of a book. Welcome. Salam alaikum. Thank both of you for
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
putting up with me again in such a short time. And Mr. Blessed and highly favored. Is it blessed and highly favored? Hey, I told you I was going to get it for the end of the course. Abdul Malik and I happen to be in a Black psychology intensive, and I've been working on this phrase for 3 weeks now, but I think I got it. I think I got it. So let me start off with, chaplaincy is a very specialized, uh, I want to say, kind of care profession, with its own history, beginning in the Catholic Church, but also I think extending to the Protestant churches, since there are over 900 denominations of Protestant Christianity. So I thought we would kind of start there and talk about what is this history of chaplaincy. Either of you can go first.
Well, the history of the chaplaincy is rooted in Christianity, a Christian tradition and mythology, and has as its basis concept of shepherd tending flocks of domesticated animals or domestic animals, sheep typically. And the chaplaincy is the concept of sending the word of Christ to those people who cannot or will not come to the church itself for whatever reasons. They have some type of gripe with the church or what have you, or they are in places that are not readily accessible to the ordained ministry of the church. And so in order to reach those people out tending their flocks, this concept of the chaplaincy came into existence for the purpose of reaching the unpreached, those people who are outside the church.
But also they're in a fixed setting, because the whole thing, technically, the way it's taught about prisons, and we know that that has not been the case in reality, is they were supposed to be places where you were in a kind of solitary environment, at least in this country, a solitary environment where you could reconnect with God. And the chaplain was supposed to help you do that, a kind of soul cleansing. But that was also before they cut off all your civil rights once you had been incarcerated. And on, jump in, Abdul Malik.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think there's an article by Bilal Ansari and Ibrahim Long. It's an academic paper about the history of chaplaincy and then more specifically within the Muslim community. But it started off in the prisons and then hospital settings as well as military. I see chaplaincy as four main areas. We have a community setting, so like an imam or someplace like that. You have higher education, universities, colleges, etc. military, which could or military in general, which I think you can put under that, prisons as well, just corrections in general. And then I think there's medical, hospitals, hospice, etc. And Muslims have been in these different fields, but it is a very new and burgeoning specialty.
Well, I know um, that outside of the prison setting, let's take the hospital chaplain, for example. If he or she is the only person on that evening and there are people needing their attention, what does the Muslim chaplain do? I mean, he's available. I'm not sure he's called upon. Um, and in the prison setting, I know years ago, it was such that the Muslim chaplain had to be the chaplain for everybody, not only Muslims. Is that still the case?
I think outside of community settings, you will find Muslim chaplains having to serve in every other area, but probably most concentrated or most frequently in hospital medical settings. If you're on call, then you're the one who is on call. Sometimes you're the only one on call. But
Hmm.
I think with hospital chaplaincy specifically, you generally have to go through CPE, clinical pastoral education, and
Hmm.
that gives you a base foundational understanding of how to serve in different contexts or different traditions as well.
What can you say what CPE is?
The clinical pastoral education is essentially an intensive, well, depending on how you do it, sometimes it's a 8-16 week process, or sometimes it's a more condensed full-time process, but where you go learning countertransference, transference, you have
Say
supervised.
what those things mean.
Countertransference is a very technical term that comes out of the psychoanalytical field that has to do with the so transference. We have to understand that first. Transference is when the effect of the chaplain sort of transfers onto or not the chaplain, the clinician trans onto the patient. So the patient has let's just be very general and say, I don't know, father issues, or they've gone through some abuse with the father, then they end up transferring that energy onto, or those emotions onto the chaplain. Countertransference is the opposite. The emotions, the feelings, the experiences of the chaplain then getting back or affecting the person who's receiving the care, or the client, if you will. And so an example of that is I was raised by a single independent African-American mom. One time I had a young woman come ask me about marriage advice who was also a single young African-American woman. And I said, listen, I'm biased because of my countertransference. My own experience may impact how I serve you. So you should go talk to someone else. And I referred her to someone else. So that's just an example of countertransference. And then to go back to CPE, you're going to learn these sort of clinical, psychoanalytical, psychological terms, but also how to use them in real time, note taking as well, etc.
And in that you hear the concept of taking on the suffering of others, and this concept of transference, which is a fundamentally Christian concept, that you take on the pain of others. And I remember the Catholic chaplains with whom I worked at USP Leavenworth were very avid about that concept of they were there to take on the pain, the whelps, the stripes of the people they served. And this represents
And the stripes.
the beating with the whip, as supposedly occurred when the Christ was marched to the mount to be crucified.
Really?
It's taking on the suffering of the inmates. And I'm pointing this out to point out one of the issue areas in chaplaincy training and rooted or based in seminaries is this component of Christian tradition. How are Muslims to look at that or to deal with that?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad both of you are leading me into that. I'm still with the transference, and now I'm with the whelps and the stripes, and I don't know if I like any of it. But how is there in Islamic philosophy or law a series of concepts of what one is to do with the prisoner.
Can you clarify that a bit more? What do you mean what one is to do?
What are you supposed to do when people in Muslim countries go to prison? What are your duties to them? Because there are no chaplains, but what are your duties to them? And what are they to expect from you?
For me, when I served in a jail setting, but also when I volunteered in prisons, the duties are no different. You have two sets of duties. You have your professional duties that are restricted to the organization that you work for. And those restrictions, for example, once an inmate were to leave the jail or the prison, I am not allowed to continue or maintain contact with them. So, like, those are certain things that we could talk about as well. But then there are like the religious expectations or duties. And I think those are no different than a community setting. Our job is to serve them and depending on the needs of the institution we're in, as well as the men and women that we're serving, that's how we're going to serve.
And
Okay, but what does Islam say? Or does have Muslim jurists or philosophers said anything?
let me first approach that question this way. When I served as a provost marshal, chief of police for American forces in Ethiopia, the prisoners in the city of Asmara and Amhara, in the jails there, if the family of the prisoner didn't come and bring them food and clothing, they sometimes didn't get food and clothing. So in the Muslim families that I observed, it was a duty of the family members to ensure to come and be good Muslims in the prison setting for their relatives, and also to bring food and what have you.
Okay, so there is.
Now, with regards to
So what you're telling me is that in the Western sphere, gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, which is more likely than not. In the Western sphere, there needs to be a professional to take on the lesions and the stripes in the tradition of Jesus Christ, which is purely theological. In the other realm, it is purely practical. Families come and take care of prisoners. There's an understanding that you know what is right and what is wrong. You're going to go to Juma. Even in the prison, you're still going to go to Juma. So the approaches, whether they've been written about or not, are very different.
I think the theological approach is different. I'm not sure the practical on the ground approach is going to be very different. And from my experience, you have the teaching aspect of it and you have the counseling aspect of it. The teaching aspect is teaching theology, teaching life skills, etc. And the chaplain or the clinical pastoral aspect of it is sitting with people, helping them through the emotional and sort of challenges that they're going through. I think the teaching aspect is going to look very different, and then the nitty gritty or the words, the concepts that are employed during the counseling is going to be different. But net, it's all going to be the same. We're helping someone through emotional challenges.
Time. Okay, we're going to take our first break. I would like for you to think about even the word pastoral, okay, and how we're Protestantizing Islam in the West by adopting the innermost conversations of a totally different religious tradition. This is Dr. Amina Al-Din. Don't get mad at me. I see Abdul Malik's lips poking out already with Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV, and we will be right back. We're back. This is Dr. Amin Al-Din on Critical Talk from Muslim Network TV with Imam Frederick Dhalfar Al-Din and Imam Abdul Malik Merchant. And I left you guys when I wanted to, excuse me, being out of breath. I wanted to think about language.
Think about language.
Yeah, I got two people with beards and y'all just chiming away over here.
Yeah,
So
that's what beers are for. We have to stroke them. Let me throw this out just to give you add to some perspective. The Christ was supposed to, on the way to the mount to be crucified, have had a robe or a cape thrown over his shoulders, and people take that in the church, some aspects of the Christian church, as a sign of his head, being the head of the church or the leader of the ministry. This word chaplain comes from the old French capel, and the place where chaplains work, the capellani, or the chapel. So this concept of the chaplain is filled with this idea of the office of a representative of the office of the ordained minister going out into the field to service the sheep. So I just want to, for the language component, I just want to throw that out there to start.
Abdul Malik?
The article that I mentioned earlier on Islamic or Muslim chaplaincy by Bilal Ansari and Ibrahim Long.
Can you type that in the so that Shardil can pick it up?
Yeah.
I don't want to lose that. Go ahead.
They mentioned everything that the Imam mentioned, but I think there's two different things. There's the language part of it, of the word chaplain and pastor and leading and being in charge of a people. But then there's the theological sort of different elements. As someone who graduated from a Christian seminary, I didn't have a problem with the language per se. I think that a challenge for Muslim students who are trying to become chaplains are going to be twofold. One, understanding Islam in general and having a grasp on it so that when they're actually doing the work, they know what they're talking about. And then two, if you're in a Christian seminary, being able to understand and be flexible enough to work with whatever you're being given and then put it into a context that's appropriate for us as Muslims. And so I think
Let me ask you something on that, because in class, I often had to talk with Muslim students about there is no sin per se in the Quran. There are various levels of disobedience, but there's no sin. And when you adopt the centerpieces of someone else's cosmology, you may be confusing things that don't need to be confused. Do you know what I'm saying?
So I think that I would differ with you in sin, but I think the fundamental part of sinning is we definitely differ with the Jews and the Christians on that, like we're based in sin or we are sinful people by nature. We don't believe that the fall of Adam and Eve, may Allah be pleased with them both, has damned us as a people. And I think that as well is challenging for people to understand.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hold on an article that the Imam mentioned by Ansari. I'm glad to hear that my research has led me to some of the outcomes that they came up with. But this concept of sin, I think I just want to make a controversial point on that. Sin at its basis in Christianity, the original sin is that we are not God. The Latin sin, without. We are not God, and that is considered to be a sin that we are not God. And I throw that out there to show you some of the difficulties we have in trying to be pastorally led in seminaries and fulfill the Islamic responsibility. Not that it can't be done, but just how much of a minefield it is.
But I think Imam Abdul Malik was mentioning the fact that if the person going into chaplaincy is not as well versed as he is, they may have some difficulty.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
Just in, how to differentiate between where Christianity ends and where Islam begins, especially if they have previously been Christian, because the terms are familiar. I'm going to assume, I've never been Christian, but I'm going to assume that the terms are familiar. But let me switch gears a little bit. Talk a little bit about the difference between the imam and the chaplain. The pandemic was an exciting time for Muslim women. And I mean, there were why are you smiling? There were webinars and everything else all over the place. And women were talking about, oh my God, I don't have to be in the back of something or in another room or in another building. I can actually listen to, talk with, for some women, it was give the khutbah. For other women, they decide, no, I don't want to do a khutbah, but I want to do a talk and we can reflect on it together. I mean, just loads and loads of opportunity. But immediately the issue arose, the imam can be a post-puberty male leading a congregation of fully grown, learned women and not know as much as they know. And because of his maleness, be put in charge. One question. Second question, the difference between an imam and a chaplain.
So when we're talking about imam, it only translates to be the leader, right? And the only things that are specific to males from imam perspective in classical or traditional Islamic jurisprudence would be leading of the prayer and giving of the khutbah, which could fall under leading of the prayer.
Right.
Everything else is up for grabs. Teaching, lectures, leading in supplications, praying, counseling, etc. There's no gender specificity there. I mean, there's cultural nuances that you could probably argue. You could argue there's perhaps a modesty of there. Some men may not feel comfortable sitting a woman because I don't know, whatever their issues are, or vice versa. I've heard all of that. But fundamentally, the only thing that would differentiate would be the prayer in traditional understanding of it. And so when we're talking about the difference between imam and a chaplain, I personally don't see a difference because you're outside of leading the prayer, the role is exactly the same.
But suppose you're a man, a young man.
So that's what I was
19 years old, leading a group of women who are scholars of Islam.
So that would be my second point, that has nothing to do with gender. That has to do with stupidity on the person who got appointed to do that. If you're, let's say, a 16-year-old young man who is still in high school leading a community, we're not talking about just a prayer, like your job is to lead the community of, people who have studied both traditionally and secularly, have extended time, like shut up and sit back. I mean, that's a different conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's a shame and a problem on behalf of the community, who would put someone that would challenge the young man with that obligation, but as well as challenge the community with that responsibility. And so for me, that's not a gender issue. That's a stupid administrative issue and an ignorance on the behalf of the young man who's jumped out there. And so one of the beautiful things of chaplaincy is that it gives an official role that women can withhold, that is uncontested because of how new it is, but also because it doesn't always require the leading of prayer. Alhamdulillah, in some of the larger masajid in America, we're starting to see women have roles. Ustadha Aisha Prime at Dal Hijra, and others. Those are just some that come to like heads of women departments and teach and do all the, essentially are female imams. But chaplaincy is that really niche area the women are able to thrive in professionally.
I think one of the issues that has to be resolved before we can ever get past this kind of concern is dealing with this issue of Adam and Hua, or Adam and Eve, and the understanding that because of what she did in giving him the apple, every woman suffers the oppression of misogyny ever since. And that is one thing we have to look at, because the Quran tells us that Adam and that with which he was paired were told that their place of existence was supposed to be the earth. And when we look at this word zawj, it's traditionally described or defined as Eve even by Muslims. But the word zawj means to be paired with something. And if Adam was not paired with Hua, if that's not the reference, what else was Adam paired with? What else was made a part of him? And the only other thing you see in that section of the Quran is that he was paired with knowledge. And I like to believe that it is knowledge improperly used or poorly understood that causes man to slip, rather than the generic female.
Yeah, absolutely. Islamically, in the Quran, it literally says, فَأَكَلَا مِنْهُمَا. Both of them ate from the tree. And that we differ with the Christian tradition with that. We don't put the blame on the woman. Allah literally says they both ate from it. So absolutely.
But somehow or the other, it has wound up as a center point. And I want to go on and ask another question. I get these questions all the time. What are future issues as chaplaincy? No, let me go back. Let me ask a question about these seminaries who have taken on the role, Christian seminaries, of course, have taken on the role of teaching everybody else how to be chaplains in their faith. Some of them are seminaries sitting at the divinity school in a major university. Others of them are detached and sitting alone with scholars that we don't really know about. What are your thoughts? We have Bayan, which was a seminary experience by itself, right? Who brought its teachers to Bayan in California. And then it teams up with a Christian seminary in Chicago. We have Chicago Divinity, which is more of an academically geared kind of institution with known Muslim scholars teaching about Islam. We have Hartford Seminary. We have the younger, well, I don't know if it's younger than Beyond in Chicago, seminary started by Muslims. I think it's in Texas, the Islamic something or the other, the Islamic Seminary with Jimmy Jones and some other people in Texas. And I'm sure there are others on the precipice of coming into being. And the accreditation qualifications for a seminary are very different than that of a divinity school inside of a university. So what are we to make of all of this?
So to just take a step back, I see 2 or 3 different types of seminaries. You have Islamic traditional seminaries where you're sitting with Islamic scholars and learning Islam somewhat of a traditional way. Then you have Christian seminaries or Christian schools that are just generally going to be exclusively Christian or ecumenical. And then you're going to have the hybrid approach where, like Bayan, Muslim seminaries are trying to partner with non-Muslim seminaries, or like Boston Islamic Seminary, which is an independent Islamic seminary that has been able to get accreditation. The problem is to work professionally as a chaplain, whether it's in prisons, in hospital, not necessarily hospitals, but definitely in prisons and definitely in federal prisons. Right. You have to have a degree in theology, preferably in divinity. And there's a certain number of course hours you have to take. In the federal prisons, it's 80 course hours, which most seminaries are only 74, 76. And so to get the accreditation, you have to go through one of these Christian seminaries. So, like, just from a seminary perspective, I think those are three that I generally see. My issue is if you go to a Christian seminary, exclusively Christian or ecumenical secular seminary, you're not going to get the theological training that is really required in order for you to serve pastorally or clinically to on a counseling basis to the people that you're serving. You're just not going to have it there. You can learn general cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, to help people with their problems, but you're not going to be able to pull from our rich tradition to get to serve that way. The opposite, if you go to an Islamic seminary, you may not have the clinical skills needed to serve pastorally or the accreditation. And so we have this challenge, and it's upon the person going to school knowing what they're getting into. I had a sister that was in class with me. I was the only Muslim I went to BU, Boston University School of Theology. I was the only Muslim the entire 3 years that I was there. One sister came in for one semester thinking that it was a traditional seminary, that she was going to have Muslim teachers going to go through theology and jurisprudence with her, and she dropped out. Then you have places like Harvard that have Muslim professors, and you can have academic classes, but it's not going to be like a traditional seminary like Qalam or Dar al-Qasim or otherwise.
It's a very well. The challenge is not as I mean, it's not a mountain. It might be a hill. But I think we ought to seriously look at the challenge. We've come up on our, what break are we on? Second or third?
Second.
Okay. Well, it's time. And I want to leave us with that. And one of the things that we're doing in the Black Psychology Intensive is talking about dreams and community. And I want to bring this, Imam Frederick has heard some of it, back to our dream and how we're going to move to make the dream come through. And I was struck by something, for those of you listening who listened last week. Abdul Malik said that one of the things our community lack, and we got to get about doing, is love. But I want to problematize that. This is Dr. Amina Al-Din. This is Critical Talk, and we're talking everything about chaplaincy with Imam Frederick Dhafar Al-Din and Imam Abdul Malik Merchant. We'll be right back.
I'm there.
We're back. This is Dr. Amina Al-Din with two imams, Dhafar Al-Din and Merchant, and we're talking about everything about chaplaincy. And in our thinking about moving or perfecting or maturing however it is we want to think about it, back into a loving community. One of the things, and I guess I'm really talking about prison chaplaincy, that comes into being, we can talk about everything that's done to the African American community. What we don't talk about is what we need to do in our own community that prevents this groundswell of Black folk in prison. Some of them need to be there, some of them don't. And it's proven time and time again that those, I mean, it's just they're in there too darn long for it to come, to knowledge that, oh, you did. I'm reading the chat. Um, that we have to think about chaplaincy is a result of a need, of a result of some level of aberrant behavior. Okay. Sometimes it's murder. Sometimes I just happen to be rolling with my bro and we got caught, or somebody else was doing something. I just happened to be in the vicinity. Whatever it is. How do we what? How do we make a part of our directed pastoral, or whatever we're going to call it, care, instilling, bringing back, reacquainting people with the necessity of love in a community? I mean, some of the problems that people have, and one of Abdul Malik's uh, favorite sayings in this atomized world, is that it's us, the individual. We're unconnected. And so, how do we as Muslims reconnect for some, connect for the first time for others? How does the chaplain deal with those things and the multiplicity of Muslim communities in the prison system, African American Muslim communities? Don't y'all just look at me.
So I want to push back a little bit. I don't think that the chaplain necessarily has to be the one serving if there is a problem. I would hope that people would speak with chaplains when there aren't problems. And I think that's where you're going to have the biggest transformations, when someone is actively looking for mentorship, looking for counseling, looking for care in good times, so that relationship is established when the bad times occur. And I also think this chaplaincy, particularly from an Islamic perspective, should be multidisciplinary, in that we studied Islam, we're studying psychology, we're studying sociology, we're studying all of these different things, philosophy, etc., to best serve the needs of the people we're with. I tend to be a bit of a pragmatist and sort of micro focus. So I just want to focus on how can I serve the people that are directly in front of me, and fixing the larger issues becomes anxiety inducing. But definitely instilling the love in those people, which has to start with them loving themselves, helping people. I sat with a young woman one time. It was in a transitional housing, and she had never been loved. If I were to tell you her story, we'd all be in tears right now. Just abused from child on up, nonstop. And when I told her that God loved her, she broke down. She'd never been told before that she was loved by anyone. And so by giving her that, I mean, I don't know what happened. She left a few weeks later, about a month later. And of course, we couldn't keep in contact. I don't know what happened, but seeing that for someone who has not only those emotional and trauma in their past, but it really uplifted her to hear that she was loved. And I think that is the first step to, as the famous statement goes, whoever knows themselves knows God. So like helping people know themselves, love themselves. And then we can talk about other types of love and overcoming challenges.
Yeah, I can see, because you read about it in the papers where young people are just I mean, as young people, they're abused, and the abuse just continues ad nauseum. But well, how then does the chaplain take his or her skills back into the community? Because those skills are a little bit wider than the role of the imam.
I think I would argue those skill sets, if done properly, could be better than a traditional imam, in the sense that the tools are there. You have the bare tools that are required to help people. Now, if we're looking for a jurist or a mufti, then that's a specific role. We need scholarship who can answer jurisprudence problems, but 85% of the problems that you're going to be are going to be marital, emotional, communal, societal, etc. And then also being able to be relevant and connect with the people so that they're able to be enriched and whatnot. And so I would assume, like, for example, I worked at Tufts, voted one of the most inclusive universities in the country. I served agnostic trans students. I served Catholic. Yeah, I mean,
did you tell Dave Chappelle that there was an agnostic trans student?
An agnostic trans student who sought me out multiple times for pastoral care.
Get out of here.
Yeah, multiple. After I left Tufts, they reached out to someone else, asked for my number. Could we stay in touch? And that just shows the human element of chaplains and the ability to connect with people in a deep way. I mean, I don't think I did anything special. That, that's Allah's grace and mercy. But a traditionally trained imam is not going to have that exposure.
Or that tolerance.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I was doing a piece of research in the Federal Bureau of Prisons a while ago. And I have to admit, at Marion, the door shut and it got quiet and the colors were drab and I was freaking out all over the place. And I had correspondence, sent surveys to Muslim prisoners. And I saw the slick and unworthy. I saw the dude who showed up to our interview with 2-3 crosses across his forehead and a couple of pairs of glasses on. And I'm just looking. He immediately caught that I was looking and began to explain, well, the right eye sees with this and the left eye sees with that. And I'm saying, And, others who were a little more forthcoming. Some were just honestly, I became Muslim because it allows me some privileges. Others who were sincerely had taken advantage of being quiet and really doing some soul searching. I could not, first of all, I couldn't have been an imam, a chaplain, or anything else there, and was in a hurry to get away. I mean, a serious hurry to get away. And, I was saying to my family, if I ever got a thought like that again, just knock me out. But it seems as though we have some of those things in our communities. They just haven't been caught doing anything to get locked up for it yet. And if we could bring the aspects of those skills back to the community, we would help in our maturation process and move us even more firmly toward a healthy community. What do you think, guys?
I think the skills, that they can be applied effectively and efficiently to the community, would be successful and would be of benefit. And I think one of the things I've always tried to encourage chaplains, imams to do, and masajid to do, is to have an office that dealt with things like chaplaincy, especially serving the prisoners. And that whatever prisons or college, scope out a map of their area and prescribe a circle of X number of miles in any direction, and make it a commitment of the masjid to serve the needs of the Muslims and the people in that area, in that circle. And I think if they were to take that approach with the number of masajid we have in most cities, I think it can have an impact properly done that could be discernible in a very short period of time and help solidify the concept of the Islamic community.
Okay, well, I know everybody has got to go pray, and two of you have got to lead prayers. So I'm going to give Abdul Malik the last word, and then we're going to salam it out.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying the last word on chaplaincy. Chaplaincy is a fascinating subject.
Yeah. So if I was to give advice to anyone who's going to be doing chaplaincy, is to figure out what are your goals. I don't think that you need necessarily a large theological base to serve in different settings. It just depends on what setting you want to do. Why do you want to do it? I think the prison system or corrections in general is the hardest. I mean, you're dealing with the most extremes of situations and circumstances. I mean, I was hearing your experience, Dr. Amina, and I was thinking, well, maybe he couldn't get two different glasses and he had to break two different ones and put them together. I could really see that being a situation, just like I knew people that accepted Islam just for the halal tray. And so understanding these different fields require a sort of flexibility, a sort of tolerance, understanding of mental health, and that also are going to have a large toll on you and be formative and transformative on you just as much, if not more, than the people you're serving. And so, one, make sure that you have, you know what you want to do, and then seek the training for that. Self-care, as they say, hurt people. And so that when you do have those heavy days, you already know, I'm going to listen to this music. I'm going to go on that run. I'm going to talk to these people to get what I don't take that home or I don't bring it to other people.
Well, I'm going to end with this. From what I see in the rise in suicides and different levels of mental illnesses, I see chaplaincy becoming a kind of different level therapy because we don't have enough therapists to serve. People are, with this ongoing pandemic, in dire need of care. And maybe sometime in the future, I'll have you two on with the woman that leads FACE and some of the other organizations in a larger kind of roundtable. First, I think we kind of all know what the issues are, but some in our audiences may not. And they may not understand how, if we can push chaplaincy in that direction, we open potential for another kind of therapist, so that there's the chaplain, the psychologist, and the psychiatrist, kind of thing. So I want to thank both of you. Pray for me. Keep me in your dua. This has been I've learned a lot in this conversation, and hopefully our audience has also. This is Dr. Amin Al-D with Imam Frederick Al-D and Imam Abdul Malik Merchant, and I will be back tomorrow night. Tomorrow night we're having political talk. Assalamu alaikum.